Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to review this sword right here. It is a Feilong Higo katana, and a couple quick disclaimers before I get into it. First and foremost, this is a second-hand sword, one that I got not too long ago. So that means that it may not be entirely representative of what you're to get if you were to buy one brand new from Feilong swords. And this one does have some wear and tear on it. It's got a few miles on it, so bear that in mind, that the signs of handling and the scuffs from cutting and things like that are likely not something that you would get were you to buy one new. Also note that I haven't used this sword a whole lot at this point. I got it relatively recently, and I honestly don't know that I'm going to get a chance to really do much of anything with it. That said, I don't feel too bad about it because there's been other really more competent cutters on YouTube that have used this sword, so you can kind of see what it's capable of doing in more competent hands, and I feel pretty okay with skipping that part and just going to the kind of fits and features, bits and bobs, if you will. One other bit to note, the Feilong website for me loads very slow. I don't know if that's a red flag for you or not, but this sword looks like it is about $500 on the website without shipping. It's $495. The specs on it as well, I'll put links to the specs for this sword in the description down below, as well as the Feilong website. But the specs actually were pretty close to what was advertised, which was refreshing as well. Anyway, I'm going to go over kind of fit and finish, bits and bobs, things like that, and we'll go from there. All right, so I'm going to start with the pommel, the end cap, the kashra down here, and one bit to note is that it has a slight ledge on it, which is less than ideal. So I can feel it. It doesn't bite into me, and it hasn't caused me any discomfort with the little bits of usage that I've done so far, but it's not really all that well put on. And you can see that the ito around here is bunched up, and I doubt that that is something that was different than from the factory. It also kind of moves around. It's not terribly secure ito. I'll talk about that in a second, though. The kashra, it has a ledge, and I don't think the transitions here and how it meets the ito is particularly good. I do like the fittings, though. I think that the Higo style, at least in the kashra and on the fuchi up here, are classy looking. The patina that's used on here has not aged particularly well, so there's some sort of metal, and the kind of painting or plating that's on here, I don't know, it just hasn't aged in a way that I find particularly tasteful. That said, I do like the theme, and I admit that my take on how well it's aged or hasn't is purely subjective from an aesthetic standpoint. It has been durable as well. I whacked these with a hammer a few times, and they've held up pretty well, haven't cracked, haven't moved around. The ito being somewhat loose around the knot over here, and the kashra not moving suggests to me that this is secured or glued on in some way to make it stable. Speaking of the ito as well, this is exceptionally tight in some spots, as in it doesn't move even under pressure, and very loose in other spots, as in it moves around pretty freely without a lot of pressure. So ito is a little bit hit and miss. It doesn't necessarily give me any pause about using. It doesn't frighten me. I don't think it's going to necessarily come undone, but I can feel the ito move ever so slightly as I twist it in my hands, which is, again, not terribly ideal. It might be because, though, it is exceptionally cold out right now. There's no humidity in the air in Minnesota, where I happen to be at the time, and it's been used a little bit. So sometimes, like, the oil from your hands absorbs in these and actually tightens things down a little bit. I think a couple coats of lacquer would make this quite a bit more suitable, because it doesn't feel like it's going to come undone, but there are some spots that are looser, I would say, than they should be. Exceptionally loose, maybe an embellishment there. It's not exceptionally loose, just not ideal. And some parts are ideal. So anyway, shaping of the handle. I do happen to like the shape of the handle. I think it fits really well. It's a little over 10 inches, and I'll put specs in the description down below. Also note that specs to the site actually seem to be pretty close. Anyway, a little over a 10-inch handle. A lot of times they end up being 12 inches or something like that. This is a little better suited. It feels pretty good for my big, giant sausage fingers. It's not too big. It's not axe-handly, but it's also not a dainty, delicate little thing. So I happen to like how it all lines up, at least in terms of the shaping of the handle. I did take the handle off as well, so worth noting that, and it did not come off particularly gingerly. It required a lot of percussive maintenance to get off, but the handle wasn't cracked. So however it's been assembled to be very, very tight, it did not result in breaking the handle or the scar cracking it, which was good. There are panels. I think they're panels anyway, but it's not particularly large nodules. This seems like a very base level skin. The pegs do come out reasonably well, and they seem of a slightly nicer quality, the Mikugi anyway, than the average bear. They're darker and seem harder than the kind of typical reused chopsticks that I tend to find on a lot of swords. The fuchi, again, just hasn't aged particularly well, not very graceful, I would say, and the transitions, though, line up pretty well. And I have to say, as well, as it goes up to the Tsuba, I like the theme. There's one other thing, actually, before I get to the Tsuba, and that is the seppa on this have been polished, and I don't know if that was something that the previous owner did or something that came from Feilong swords, but they have been polished. So both the habaki and the seppa appear to have been polished. I don't know that anyone ever took the handle off, though, to do that before, because it was on there pretty tight, and I don't see any percussive maintenance, which I required to get it off. Anyway, there's some polished bits on here. I don't necessarily mind that, but it's not something I really care too much about. They get scuffed and things like that, so the polish doesn't do a lot for me. Anyway, it is worth noting that it's there. And then the Tsuba, it's thinner, and overall I like the shape. This is not a terribly embellished Tsuba. There's nothing particularly zazzy or crazy about it, but it's got a nice raised rim. There's no sharp ledges on it, and it's simple and pragmatic. And if you're not particularly good at casting things, and you don't, I don't know, I like the theme, basically. I like the execution. It's simple, and it does the job. One more quick note, the habaki looks like the standard brass habaki that you might see on everything, but it actually has a slight kind of cant to it, and it's a little wider and a little better shaped than the average habaki, honestly. It has a little bit more dimension and whatnot than I would say the average one does, at least in a $500 sword price point. So I do actually like the habaki, even though it looks like the same brass bits. It has enough of a differentiation with some angles and such that it tickles my fancy anyway. Going to talk a little bit about the saya. So this saya actually matches one that I have from Ryan swords, and it looks the exact same, but they are completely different. This sword is wider than the example that I have from Ryan sword, and even though it has the same kind of grooving and the same kind of gloss black paint, it's actually different sizes. They're not, at least this one is wider. The transitions here are not as good, but they're also not terrible. I have to say that this is a little wider perhaps than it needs to be on the saya, but at the same time it seems to overall look pretty good. There's nothing exactly jutting or inappropriate at all. It just doesn't line up as well as I think perhaps it could. The saya itself, though, functions pretty well. It doesn't fall out. The tension on it is pretty nice. This sword has again been used, so maybe they come tighter or looser, but in any case, this one doesn't appear to have been modified, and it fits overall from a tension perspective pretty well. It doesn't rattle, at least not terribly. Really shake it, maybe it'll get a little, but it doesn't rattle. It's a pretty quiet saya, and it's easy to do iaido and stuff with. It's actually a pretty good fit overall. These little shitodome pieces up here have now been glued in by me, but initially they were loose and kind of bounced around and have caused some minor scuffing around the scabbard area here, but that was a dab of glue, and generally I don't know why so many manufacturers don't secure them, but I would honestly rather they just not be put on than put on there and not secured. If they stay in the presentation knot, or this Sagi-haba just kind of stays tied in the pretty knot and you never undo it, you won't ever notice the issue. But if you ever use it and have the Sagi-haba untied as for practical application, then these things come loose and bounce around, and they fray the Sagi-haba when you take them off. It's just, I don't know, to me it's dumb. And all it took me was a little dab of glue. How long that will hold up, I suppose, I don't know. But anyway, I like the overall assembly of the saya. I like the grooves. I like the black look. I like the overall aesthetic of the sword and the kind of the presentation, the design. Nothing inherently grabs my eye. It's a very kind of, I don't know, maybe a cliche looking katana, but I like it. It's got enough difference and embellishments in it to make it something special. If we move on to other bits that make the sword special, so you'll notice that it has, here's the blade, anyway, the pointy stabby part. It has this double bohi. I can't remember, Fatasuji, or I can't remember. There's a name for this double bohi that's on here, but it is unique. And there's one other thing that you see on the bohi that you probably can't see it, but the bohi are actually done without a bunch of ripples in it. So if I look along the planes of the blade here and try to show you, basically there's not a bunch of surface ripples in the bohi or in the surface of the blade. However this was made, there's not a bunch of surface ripples in it, which is surprising. Generally speaking, all the bohi that I see have a bunch of ripples in the surface that make it, I don't know, less than ideal if you're doing this with your sword, which maybe most of you aren't. But anyway, it has a double bohi, and that is somewhat unique. They're well polished, again unique, and they terminate in the same spot. So these bohi, they terminate in about the same way. They're not particularly sharp terminations. That would be something that I think would be a nice additional detail, but they do terminate the same way in the same position, which is nice. It also has this okasaki right here, so it's not grotesquely huge or anything, but it is a larger than average kasaki, and it's not geometric for the folks that care about that kind of thing. It's basically a polished on yakote. This line has just been kind of moved down from here where it might there we go. From here, where it might normally be a little further down, it's more or less an artistic embellishment or something like that, rather than something that you run your finger over. If you care about that kind of thing, then I guess more power to you. I don't personally. It doesn't really matter if the Yokote line has a sharp angle coming off of it that you feel more with your fingers. This is perfectly suitable to me, and I kind of like the execution. And that's, I suppose, all of these little artistic embellishments are fun. Honestly, I like the aesthetic design of the sword, and I think it is a handsome looking sword. In terms of other bits to know about the sword, it's pretty wide at the base and actually stays pretty wide, and it looks maybe a little more simple, but it's actually a pretty stout blade, at least in terms of its appearance here and measurements, which again are in the description down below. That said, in terms of usage, this is actually pretty stout in the hand. It feels not clumsy, but it feels stout, which is surprising. This is 2 pounds 5 ounces, or a little better than 2 pounds 5 ounces, which makes it kind of in the medium light side of weight. Yet it has a point of balance 6 inches above the habaki, which for a 27¼ inch sword is not I guess normal. Normally that would be a little further back, and even in larger swords, kind of 5 inches is pushing it. 6 inches lends itself to a very kind of tip heavy feeling, and I can't say I mind it, but it is somewhat surprising when you see the specs on the sword at 2 pounds 5 ounces. You might think it's kind of lively, but it's not. It's really kind of got a lot more presence than you would expect. People say this is really good for tameshigiri. It doesn't have the same kind of blade profile as the Hanwei XL, so I don't know, having not done it yet, I guess I can't say for sure. It has a very, very keen, sharp edge, so I'm sure it's going to do that reasonably well. But at the same time, I don't know if it's going to compete in the same leagues as those blades or not. That said, stout, kind of tip-heavy feeling lends itself to being a reasonable cutter. It feels controllable and nice. It's just on the tip-heavier side, so know that. Other people that have cut with it have said they're able to pull off some tricky stuff too, though. So perhaps it's kind of a jack of all trades in that regard. Anyway, it's a little small for me, but I have to admit I like the overall theme. I think it's handsome. I like the way the hamon is done too. It's somewhat shallow. A lot of times they're a little more flamboyant than this is, but it still has some artistry to it. There's no folding or anything like that either. This is a T10 blade, supposedly. I say supposedly because I have no way of really verifying it, but handsome for what it is. There's a lot of little features on here. Under the handle, I did take it off, and I want to say that the nakago lacks some of the refinement that I might expect in a sword here. A lot of the other swords out there now are starting to put a little bit more attention, especially in the $500 category, in the nakago, and this is almost there. It just doesn't have the attention to detail. It looks honestly fugly, but it's close to it. It has a reasonable shape. Things are done, but there's burrs, and there's no attempt at file markings or anything like that, or really cleaning it up, and I can't necessarily blame them for not doing that. A lot of people will never take the handle off and actually see the work done there, but having a nice clean nakago is something that gives me confidence in the other things I can't see done on a sword like this. So anyway, I can't say the nakago is great. It does have a signature on it. It's got a date stamp on it. It's got a reasonable shape to it and kind of the fundamentals of what need to be there to be better, but the nakago is not in a state that I would call really pretty or good. So all that's left is really to answer the question, do I personally think the sword is worth it or not? And I'm on the fence a little bit, and I feel a little guilty about saying no because I haven't spent a lot of time with the sword, but I'm probably going to lean more towards no. I think it's just a little bit overpriced as I compare it to other swords in the market that have similar features. Now, honestly, there's not a lot that put together a package exactly like this, and this does check a lot of boxes, both from the kind of functional, well-designed, thought-out standpoint. I mean, it is a sword that is kind of tip-heavy and has a stern kind of presence to it without being overbuilt. It's actually pretty light, and it's just a well-designed sword overall, and that is kind of provides that tip-heavy feeling without being clumsy and overbuilt like a lot of manufacturers tend to do. So there's some good design and good execution here, but there's also things that are missed. The Ito hasn't necessarily held up well. There's transitions here that are likely from the factory. It doesn't come apart particularly well, and it uses some fittings that aren't exactly bespoke, and maybe those things matter to you and maybe they don't. But to me, as I compare it to other things on the market, if you wanted something perhaps more feature-rich, you could go with a Jayco or a Ryan sword or something like that that lets you do kind of a mass customized thing, and I think you can get a lot further with at least the features. If you care about folding and kind of that stuff, then you can get that at a price point that's lower than this. If you want something that's nipped and tucked better, then I would argue that the Skyjiro stuff nips and tucks just about as many boxes, maybe even a couple more, does something a little bit more bespoke, but admittedly you're going to probably have trouble getting anything out of them at the moment. I'm not sure exactly what the state of their business is, but I did like their swords, and if you could find one in stock somewhere, then hopefully you would be pleased with it. I think it checks anyway as many or more boxes than this does. And then Huawei is the other one that I compare to, and I don't know if you could order a Huawei with the same type of stuff, but I think that they actually checked more boxes. I think their swords were really well executed, and the flaws that I found here didn't seem present on the example that I got to see last time. So as I compare this to other things in the market, I'm not seeing it making a particularly compelling value, but I also see that it does check a lot of boxes. It's also a very good sword, and it's not thousands of dollars or anything like that. It's asking a fair price for what is, to me, seems like a very good product. So I don't think necessarily the value is there, but I do think it's a good product. And if something about this sword in particular sings to you, then it seems quite good. And also, I'll put links in the description down below of this video so you can watch other people cutting that. Yada yada. I probably mentioned it before, but a lot of people have had positive things to say about it, and I'll try to make the searching easy for you by putting what I found in the description down below. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble, so I'm just going to call it here and say I think it's a good sword, but I think it's a little bit overpriced, and that's my opinion. But that's it. Whatever I have to say shouldn't really matter. Hopefully the video and the other links and stuff that I've shared will give you enough information to make up your own mind, and that's all I've got. As always, cheers and thanks for watching.